Thank you. It's the usual agenda with the exception of the social supper. So first up will be our speaker for tonight, Graham Fry, attended to by Liz, putting in third time's worth after the presentation. Then after the presentation and associated Q&A, we'll move on to some general business and follow that by adjourning to enjoy a social supper. For the Zoomers out there, a reminder to please mute your microphones if not already done so, and please keep them muted during the presentation. For the Q&A session, you can ask questions by virtually raising your hand or using the chat function to send a message to the off host, or you can type your question into the message and it can be read out for you. Please mute your microphone after asking your question. For those here in the audience, please raise your hand and I will ask you to come to the front to ask your question so that it can be picked up by the microphone and heard by others on Zoom. So, straight on to introducing the speaker. Tonight's speaker is Graham Fry, who I'm sure most of you will already know from his long association with Oatley Flora and Fauna. Costa Rica is a stable and easily accessible country in Central America with a rich biodiversity and a commitment to conserving its natural environment. Graham and partner Liz spent 2 weeks there last October on a guided tour that focused on birds and other wildlife. So sit back, relax and enjoy the presentation, and I'll now hand over to Graham to show and tell.
Listen, I had a trip. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. We've got a new sound system, so listen, I did a tour with a company called Coach Wildlife Tours. It's a West Australian company. We've done a couple of trips with them. And so we did this trip to Costa Rica. And we're both very much interested in wildlife, and Costa Rica is a real hotspot as far as wildlife goes. So anyone's interested, particularly in birds, Costa Rica is the place they all want to visit. So we went on this tour now. Coats are an interesting company in that they organise a tour of Costa Rica, but it's up to you to organise how you get there. So, most people flew there via the US of A. We decided we wouldn't go that way because this was just at the stage of the federal election in America. And we thought something could go wrong. So we decided to go via South America. So we flew to Santiago and then up to Peru. We overnight in Peru and flew on to Costa Rica the next day. Worked out very well. So here we are. We're now getting ready for our Costa Rican trip. Just a little bit of history about the country. You'll notice the name Costa Rica. It's nominally meant rich coast. This is a Spanish thought they were getting when they invaded the country. It didn't quite work out that way. Okay. Many of you are probably not exactly sure what Costa Rica is. So that's it there. So you've got Colombia down here, Panama, where the canal is, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and then Mexico. So the whole lot of little nations through here. And you notice in Costa Rica there's a port there and there's another port there. So they sort of compete with the Panama Canal in some ways. There are a lot of trucks running between those two places we notice. But that's where it is. So the history of the place is that from about 7,000 BC, they think that's when it was occupied by hunter-gatherers, probably the same sort of people that came through America and South America. But there's virtually no evidence of what happened. There's no, they can't quite do much about it. So the real history starts when Columbus, who happened sharing. Yeah, so Columbus landed on the Caribbean coast. Not he made at least 4 trips. This was his 4th trip, and he wasn't actually quite sure where he was actually, apparently. But anyhow, so the Spaniards then took over the place, and hopefully they're going to find lots of gold and other riches, but they did not materialise. So they never found any gold or any riches. So it was wiped out by the colonialists, but by the invaders with disease and armed conflict and slavery. There still is some. We did meet a couple of Indigenous people when we were there, but they were very much a minority, I would understand. So the first Spanish settlement was a town called Cartago, which is in the central part of Costa Rica. We went through there when we were travelling around, but it's no longer the capital. Another city, El Salvador, is now the capital. The early Spanish settlers were all farmers of maize, wheat, and cacao. So in 1821, they gained independence from Spain. They joined a united province of Central America, which included Guatemala and Nicaragua. In 1848, they declared themselves a Republic of Costa Rica, and in the mid-1800s, Costa Rica was the world's leading coffee exporter, and coffee first introduced to Costa Rica in the 1700s. Well, the coffee there wasn't all that inspiring, It was more tuned to American taste than our taste, unfortunately. So in 1948, they had a civil war, over disputed election results. When the new government was formed, they did a pretty amazing thing. They abolished the army, and that is still the case to today. They granted universal suffrage, and they established a free education system. Supposedly 25% of the budget spent on education. It was pretty inspiring, sort of, when you hear those sort of numbers. So the economy is really based on tourism. A lot of US visitors come there to escape the northern winter, and a lot of Europeans also coming there these days. Has a lot of agriculture. They have some electronic manufacturing, and they make medical equipment as well. So it's quite a diverse thing. And apparently some US companies have got the headquarters or make a part of their business down there as well. So I'm not quite sure what it's like these days with the United States system. And so up until 1998, coffee and banana were the dominant exports. In Costa Rica, in the capital, there's a Costa Rican art museum. It was actually their first international airport, in the middle of the town, so it's been moved out. And it's the history of the country all around the walls, and it's stucco painted to resemble burnished metal. It was created by a French artist. Very, very impressive. Quite astounded by it, actually. But, so the reason Costa Rica is so interesting to biologists is that it's got an area of 50,000 kilometres, which is a little bit smaller than Tasmania. About 50% is forested, mainly rainforest. It's the first country in the world to have reverse deforestation. It contains 5% of the world's biodiversity, which is pretty amazing. 1,400 species of orchids, 440 species of amphibians and reptiles, and 840 species of birds. That's a similar number to Australia, but we're about 1,500 times bigger. So you can imagine the density of birds there compared to what it is here. It must be a pretty amazing place, and that's why we all want to go there. And so it's a popular destination for ecotourists, particularly bird watchers. So that's a sort of topographical map of it. So you can see there's a main range runs through the middle of the country. That's the capital, San Jose. That's Nicaragua there, and there's and that's Panama in the bottom here. There's about 7 volcanoes through here. They had the last big eruption 10 years ago, but we did see a few that had a bit of smoke coming over the top. But it's quite high through here. We're quite amazed. We stayed at a place down here, and one member of our party got sick, and no one knew what the problem was. They took her to hospital, and it was purely altitude sickness, because we're at 3,000 metres. She'd never been at that height before, so we wouldn't know because it was rainforest. I think it was all sea level. So this is the route we did on our trip. So we started from the capital here. We stayed at a lovely hotel called Hotel Bougainvillea. We went down to the coast here, a place called Cerro Lodge. We went on to another coastal lodge called Ensenada Lodge. Went up to the Anita Rainforest Ranch. Another naturalist lodge, Cabo Negro. That's right close to the border of Nicaragua. We went to stayed in another down here place, a very nice place. Then we come to the Rancho Naturista, and finally we end up Hotel Sabadri, and we went back to there at the end of the trip. So that's where we stayed, mostly 2 nights, and most of those stops we won 2 and I had 3. So it worked out really well. We had 8 people, and we had a little mini bus of 14, 15 people capacity. So we just had our Australian guide, we had the Nicaraguan guide, sorry, the Costa Rican guide, and a driver. And so we had about 15, 16 people in the bus. And no, about 12 people in the bus. So it worked out really well. And of course you have to realise it's a tropical climate, and like most tropics, you have a wet season. So it goes from April to November. So we were there right at the end of the tropical season, wet season. And so most days it would start picking up the mountains, it would start raining mid-afternoon. Not heavy rain, but just to make it a little bit wet. And then it would clear up overnight, the next morning it'd be perfect. So that's what we have most of the time. So this is a photograph of the window of the hotel in Costa Rica, in San Jose. So they're surrounded by mountains. That's the main city down there, and it had these beautiful grounds with lots of wildlife. So that's one of the many spectacular species. That's called a Baltimore oriole, and that's actually a migrant from the US. So that's why this place is so important, is that a lot of the North American birds migrate to south to avoid winter, and so that's why it's such a really, they sometimes don't come as Costa Rica, but they can go further south as well. There's actually a blackbird, but you wouldn't, it's a stunning bird. And the other thing you really see a lot of there are hummingbirds. They're stunning little birds, and they're really very, very spectacular. I've got some more footage later on to show you about them, but they're feeding on a thing called a blue porterweed, which is widespread in tropical, subtropical Africa, America, and it's planted in many lodges and what have you. So the flowers are rich in nectar and attract many butterflies and small hummingbirds. We did a number of boat cruises. This was the first one we went to. That's on the Australian crocodile. It's an American crocodile. They don't look all that much different. They're pretty big and nasty, so it's nice seeing one. But glad we were in a boat. And this one of the lovely rainforest trees with the spectacular buttress roots, and not sure the significance of those rocks around them. Couldn't find any information about that. Must have been something, I think. So this is a black spiny-tailed iguana. So it's quite a few different reptiles when we were moving around. No danger, although our guide never knew much about Australia. They kept saying things like, "Don't go in the bush, there's snakes there." And we said, "We do actually have snakes in Australia." No, like, "Oh, but ours are poisonous." So you're a bit worried about safety, doesn't have any problems. So there's a fascinating, it's a tiny little bat. They're called the common tent-making bat, and then they chew the midrib on the leaf there, and then the leaf flops down and creates a little shelter for them. A very clever little animal. One of the tourist things is the Pacific Rainforest Aerial Tram, or gondola, which it descends through the tropical rainforest, and you can see what's happening around here. That's it going up there. But it's really quite good, actually. We saw sloths and toucans and I think all basilisk, woodpeckers, iguanas, and buckthorns. It's quite an interesting trip. And that's one of the woodpeckers we saw. So I saw quite a lot of different woodpeckers out there. Stunning birds. It's one of the places, it was the first place we stayed at outside the capital, called Cairo Lodge, and it's one of the coastal towns, and it's quite popular with tourists, and very pleasant. Although the monkeys were very noisy, 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course, you get black vultures are quite common down there, and they seem to like the swimming for some reason. what they're after there. Maybe someone might throw some food. And these were scarlet macaws. Obviously, they put out food for them, and so a pair of them were hanging around as well. So they're pretty amazing birds. They're massive tails, and they're certainly bigger than our parrots. And this is a little monkey which was hanging around once again and eating the food, called a Panamanian white-faced capuchin. There were lots of monkeys in Costa Rica. Saw a few of them. And this is a thing called a cracker butterfly. It's a diet of rotting fruit, etc. And the males make a cracking noise with their wings, apparently. So they put out all this food for the birds, and everything else comes along and enjoys it as well. Now, those wasps there, they called them the warrior wasp. It's a social wasp that builds a huge paper nest, but it has an incredibly painful sting, apparently, which on the Schmidt Sting Pain Index is ranked 4 out of 4. So it's probably not a thing you'd want to sort of explore. That's another social wasp nest, hanging down there, huge thing, like 2 or 3 meters long. Okay, so we went to town, we went to Costa Lodge, now we're going to Martin Centre Lodge. This is a beautiful one. It's actually a working property, and the owner had sort of just set aside one side and built this lovely accommodation right on the coast, and was a really lovely spot for birds and animals. And we spent 2 nights there. It was really very nice. The working ranch that raises horses and cattle and harvests salt. They had a big paddock there with lots of salt in it, and they were pumping water through that and draining it off and taking off the dried salt off the top. So that's just looking out from our bedroom. You see this massive tree. We don't know what species it was. And then the coast is just beyond that. And the swimming pool is just down below that too. I highly recommend it. Very enjoyable. And then there's this rickety old wharf, which we waddled along and then went on a cruise for a couple of hours. Saw a lot of the animals in the area. So this is in the Gulf of Nicoya. So there's a lot of birds there. You notice they're brown pelicans, not like our white ones. So that's what they have in America, brown ones. And that I'm not sure what that one is. That's a spit. Young one. Okay.
Brown ones are young, white ones are older.
Are Well, they're all brown. Anyway, there's a thing called a boat-billed night heron, just hiding in the mangroves. That's a green heron. Now, it's pretty similar to what we know as Australian heron in Australia. Hard to tell much difference between them, but they're common along the rivers, and we saw a few of those. That's called a roseate spoonbill. You know, we have spoonbills in Australia which are white and black. They have this beautiful red cup around them. That's this bill there. It's interesting over there because nearly all the bush birds, unlike anything we get in Australia, it's just totally different families and very little in common. But the water birds, they are not exactly the same, but one of the similar families exist there as well. So it's quite interesting in that aspect. But that's called a magpie, or magpie jay, to be precise. There's nothing like our magpies, obviously. White-throated magpie jay, and we saw a few of those. They're very noisy, gregarious, and carried on. I mean, this is right beside a working port, so it's considered mind the disturbance there. Okay, we're now moving on. We move from in December. We did when we were in the bay along that waterway there, that's part of this inlet. So we're now going up to a Anita rainforest ranch. So this was a little bit higher than we've been at sea level basically. This next lodge is about 300 metres above sea level. So there's a brief look at what it looks like. Very, very nice and spectacular vegetation around it. One thing they did on this property was grow cacao or cocoa, and he actually makes chocolate there as well. So that's part of the tourist thing, I suppose. So we got a big talk about how you make chocolate and the whole history of it all. It's very, very good actually. And they're little leaf cutter ants. Under those leaves is a little ant, and they take the leaves underground to their nest where they chew them up and cultivate the fungi, which they then feed to their larvae. They can strip a tree of its leaves in one day. So, and they're quite a pest in the cacao plantations. It's amazing. Seeing little trails of those leaves walking past. So that's the owner showing us when you cut a cacao fruit, that's all the seeds later become chocolate. And then he sort of gave us this nice little dish to savour the lovely taste of chocolate. He tells a funny story that Lint Chocolates said Lint, when he first started making chocolates, he used to grind them up and grind them up. And then he was grinding up some when he got sick, and he didn't come back for about 12 or 14 hours. And when he came back, he suddenly found the chocolate was super smooth. And that's how smooth chocolates came about. And that's a whole lot of way you can flavour chocolates, various things that can be added to it. So, yeah, very interesting what can be done. And this is called a peel-billed toucan. This was a distraction while this other bill was giving us the lecture. He decided to come in and perhaps try to taste the chocolate too. That's another one. So it's called a yellow-throated toucan, a massive bill. Wouldn't want to get near one of those. That's another. That's called a pollet araucari. They're very close related to toucans. Spectacular birds. Okay, so after our little chocolate adventure, we then went to another lodge up here it's right beside a big lake and the Nicaraguan border. And we spent a few days there, once again, mainly in the boat, walking around. But a lot of the lodges from here on in put out food trays. So every outside the dining room there'd be food put out, and so you wouldn't be short of looking at the birds. They're just all around you the whole time. There's a stunning little bird called the red-legged honey creeper. Not surprised. Another one was quite common in the place called a blue-grey tanager, and we saw them in quite a few different places in the country. This is probably a bird about the size of a sparrow, a little bit bigger, but very, very beautiful bird. And this is another tanager. This is the Passerini's tanager. It's a vivid black and red males, and you can just see a female. She's a poor old bit drab brown one. And the males are the spectacular red bit on the bottom. That's another picture of one. One of the cruises we did, not river where we saw the crocodile, we saw a crocodile in this sort of area as well. You can see a lot of it's just rainforest, and not in some ways it's not dissimilar from North Queensland, but all the species are probably vastly different. And that's a bird which is similar to what you get in Australia, but that's the they call it anhinga, and it's a related Australian data, so it's not all that much different, but it's an American version, you might say. It's another bird. We get a jacana. This is called a jacana. It's a northern jacana, and it's on the Azolla water plant. And that's a black-collared hawk. I don't have a very fancy camera, so some of these shots aren't terribly sharp, but to be honest, best I can do. They're lugging in a camera this big. So. And this is the green iguana on a riverbank. In the evening, they climb high into the trees. And at one place, we've counted 23 in 500 metre stretch of the river. So they're really quite common. And this is another little bat. They call it the tiny sack-winged bats. Look like splats of mud on a tree trunk.
How big was that?
Sorry?
How big?
We had a group called them, looked like mud being thrown at the tree trunk, little splats of mud.
Yeah, so that's a sort of type. So the head there, little. And that's when we cruise, and you can see that's actually a volcano. Got a little bit of smoke coming out of it. That's what's setting off in Nicaragua. This on the cruise, we could see it in the distance. Actually, they do have a lot of Costa Rica is relatively rich compared to the other countries around there. They do have a lot of illegal migration, people coming there from Nicaragua and Panama, what have you. And we saw a couple of people in a boat on this trip, and we wondered whether they might have been Nicaraguans. We don't know, but we're not sure. But we were told that Nicaragua, the Costa Ricans will employ these people, they pay them very little money. We going up a road one day, on the rough roads we were on, and we had to stop because these fellows on the side of the road had picked a lot of blackberries, and a truck there was picking up the blackberries. And this guide said, about 7 or 8 fellows who were doing the picking, and he said, they're probably all Nicaraguans working there, and they're probably getting paid $1 an hour. I mean, he didn't know for sure, but that's how to go. Okay, we're now going from that area, we're coming back down, stopping this area in the central part of the country. And more the tourist area, most of the places we stayed at for the first half of the trip, we were the only guests. There was no one else around because we're a little bit early for the American tourist season. So because we're there in October, but by the stage we're coming into November, and we were starting to see lots of Americans start to arrive as well. So a lot more people in the place we were staying at. Yeah, this is a green iguana. There's actually, I mean, a cafe, and there's a lot of them around there. Obviously, they get fed very well. So they're fed on veggie scraps and grow to impressive size. This bloke would have been that long. Head like that, massive. And we went on a little pineapple plantation that was on the side of the road, and we just drove in there to have a look at people looking after these. And one of the things we had never realised that you never see flowers on pineapples in Australia. And we found out that they don't like flowers because that results in seeds. So you don't want seed amongst pineapple fruit. So in Australia, you never see seeds on pineapples, or flowers on pineapples. So the next place we stayed at had a big feeding tray, and then the dining room was sort of adjacent to it. And when we arrived, there must have been 40 or 50 Americans with massive cameras all taking pictures. It was like you couldn't get close to the fence. There's so many people there. But then they all left by about 3 o'clock, so we wouldn't be in the place ourselves after that. This is a lovely bird called that son's what. This son's what. It's related to kingfishers, bee eaters, and rollers. So they sit and wait for predator, and very cooperative photographing them. They're probably about at that long, close to foot long. And when we were staying at that lodge, we went to a little place nearby, and there were lots of activity at the feeding. This was another bird. This is a green honey creeper. But, yeah, and squirrels. We saw quite a few little squirrels taking advantage of the food for the birds. And that's a northern raccoon. Another woodpecker, that's called a black-cheeked woodpecker, this one. This is called the strawberry poison dart frog.
But it's the blue jeans version.
While we're staying at that Salverde place, we went on a guided night walk. There's one criticism we had of our guide. He was very wary, worried about snakes, that we didn't have much opportunity to go much walking in the bush very much. And so that's the only part we're a little bit disappointed about. But we did go on a guided walk and then included crossing this bridge at night without any lights. So that was interesting because there's quite a strong flow of water underneath. And what you hear was water, and walking across this rickety bridge and swaying back and forth. So, but we did see quite a few animals, so that was good. We did see one of these. That's not that photograph, but it's a thing called a kinkajou or honey bear. They're related to raccoons, and they diet of fruit and nectar, and we saw two on the wall. Very cute. And this was another night walk, and this was a small arachnid little spider, and fellow had a UV torch. And pretty amazing how the colours of its legs sort of come out like that. And the next day we went to this interesting little property, it's only about 10 hectares or 10 or 15. The fellow used to run it as a commercial fruit orchard. But he said he couldn't compete with the big multinational companies around the place, so he decided to convert it to a nature reserve. So they planted a lot of things there, and tourists now come in and wander around the place, get escorted around the place. Those are fabulous, really nice. We saw so many animals there, really nice. This is a two-fingered sloth. So you can see a baby there on its back. Yeah. So you can't quite see the two fingers, but they're incredibly powerful. Even though they live very slowly, someone said that not many animals would take them on because they reckon that those two nails they have are so enormous and so strong. They do a lot of damage. So even panthers probably won't ever go. It's another picture, and that's the young one there. Yeah, beautiful, isn't it? They're quite big. Yeah. So, there's this another little bat. This is called the Honduran white bat, and it eats only figs. Tents constructed from heliconia leaves. Bright yellow ears and nose leaf and lips are a result of carotenoid. It's my wife's biology, you know. And when we're there, these are our snakes. We saw that they displayed a couple of snakes. And this is what we call a Highland pit viper. Nice little bit of eyelashes here. So it's only a little snake like that long. What a pretty little thing. And this was another one they had, and this was a palm pit viper. They laughed because the fellows drew a line on the ground and said, don't step over that line. Before then they brought out the snakes. But, so we now leaving that area and we're going to this rancho naturalist. So this was more in high country. We're getting up in the probably 700 or 800 metres area now, and there's a really nice spot. And there's a volcano in the background there, Churialba volcano, and there's a nice little quiet area to go in there bird watching. Enjoy the view. And now we start to get right into the hummingbirds. They're very much a mountain-dominated bird, and we're still watching lots of them. And they put out feeding stations, so naturally enough, these things are attracted to them. And they really are quite stunning. Of course, there are a few mammals around. This was a white-nosed coati. And another one. That's a Central American agouti. That was quite a big animal, actually. He was just wandering around the ground under the food trays from the birds, probably picking up scraps. And this is a young basilisk on a riverbank. So we saw those big ones earlier on, this is the baby one. So now we're now going down to Hotel Savigray, which is at 2,500 metres, but getting there you've got to go through up to 3,000 metres up through the top. You're over 3,000 metres, so it's quite different to the rest of the country. So once again, there's lots of hummingbirds, and that's the feeders they put out for them. Some sugary substance in there. And the birds take as paradox. It's a white-neck jacqueline. Because these birds are so used to being fed, they can't run up to you. They have to have a visual camera to get pictures of it. And so you can see that's a fairly typical afternoon, it's showery and the hummingbird garden. This was just a cafe that we had in lunch. This is all happening there. Another one. Yeah, no, that's a Talamanca hummingbird. That's a lesser violet here. It's another violet here. And this was one that was actually in the hotel we were staying at, just in the grounds. This one was just nesting. That's a nest. And just a pair up there sitting on the nest. Another woodpecker, this is acorn woodpecker as well. And in this area there are these cloud forests, but they're little cleared areas. This was actually a small in-holding in the national park, and it actually was a dairy, all things. So, in the Talamanca Mountains, they're called. So there's oak, stork, bamboo, and lichen. What is interesting here, these trees here are avocado trees. And there's a particular bird which loves avocados, which is found in this area. So that's the rest of the property. So if you cattle wandering around here, and that's where they milk, and that's where they make some cheese. Very rough and ready, but anything else. That's the bird which that's all about. It's called resplendent quetzal. They're quite one of the famous birds in Costa Rica. It's not terribly good photos. A very long tail feather when they're in full breeding plumage, and it's one of the birds you need to tick off when you go there. And that I didn't take that photograph. That's why I'm swallowing an avocado.
They certainly.
Yeah, it must be small there. Yeah, so the hotel we were staying had just adjacent to a little called Feathers Garden, and a fellow there was a bit of a botanist, and he had all this area around for the birds and going to watch the birds, but actually was growing lots of plants to re-establish plants from warmer areas because the air is warming up. So you're trying to get plants from lower areas to grow them at a higher elevation because with global warming, that's what they've got to do. So they're ahead of the pack. Everyone in Australia's doing that. It's another tanager. It's called the plain coloured tanager. Stunning bird. And that's Miriam's Quetzal restaurant. That's the Emerald Toucanet. These massive bills. Yeah. So that was it. Yeah.
Is it all?
Right, at one point, generally around these parts, there are signs that please don't feed the birds. See, we have different policies.
Different attitude there. They just think. But said every tourist place we went to, particularly the second half, had feeding trays out, mainly bananas and fruit they were put out. But yeah, that seemed to be what it was all about.
Any other questions?
Sorry?
Company, well, it's wildlife company.
Coats for Western Australia. We've travelled with them before, and they have overseas trips as well as trips in Australia. Mm. It's to eating fruit. You know the channel-billed cuckoos? It's for eating fruit. So I think they often have just quite a small berry at the end of them, but they are fruit eaters, as I understand them. But yeah, the channel-billed cuckoo we get here in summertime. It's got a huge bill, but I think mainly eats fruit. So I'm not quite sure of the significance of the bill. But yeah.
But isn't the bill, it's actually very light.
Yes,
It looks
yes.
as if it's like to take the head off.
Yes, that's right.
Another question over here, Scott.
So, Brian, did you find good fellow bird banders over there?
Not bird banded. We did see a number of other birding, and a couple of places we're staying. We saw guides who had other bird people with them, and yeah, so it's a very popular place to go birding.
One group came in from, I think it was a mixture of American and European group, and they were with an English guide who looked vaguely familiar. His name was Marvin. You know, Marvin Wildlife Tours on TV. Anyway, he was doing a very good job, and he was quite helpful and telling us, our group, what the birds were. So there was a nice feeling between the different guides to tell us what was there. And when we did come across some young birders, Costa Rican birders, and they'd been called up by the head of the lodge where we were staying to help with some of these groups. So the young people are learning about their wildlife and finding it's an income, and they're very enthusiastic and very knowledgeable. And the other thing, as Graham mentioned, there were these 3 little places we went to: Frog's Heaven, Feathers Garden, and then Miriam's Quetzal. Little enterprises run by families. So there is the opportunity for small people, groups, to make a business. One place we stayed at, La Ensenada, early on, we came across a chap who was walking out to one of the settlements within the ranch because he'd been paid by the government to give them courses in business management. So they talk about the importance of education. I think perhaps education is not quite as well spread as was intended in Costa Rica, but I believe there is a good education system. And the fact that this government was paying this chap to go out and help people perhaps set up their own little businesses. Well, we were impressed by that. And he was walking all this way in really hot weather, and our bus guide said, "Oh, let's stop and pick him up." And he did have a car, but his wife worked in San Jose, so she had the car, but he was prepared to walk these Ks just to go and teach these people.
The businesses they were focusing on, were they sort of more touring businesses?
Yes, the ones we went to, I guess because we were tourists. But I believe there is, certainly the chap who picked us up in San Jose to drive us to our hotel was very informative. He probably at that stage was only a bus driver, but our Costa Rican guide had been a bus driver and had
Progress.
progressed. So this chap spoke very good English, and he was very informative. He pointed out tiny little coffee farms in the city, San Jose, as we drove through. So quite a lot of small holdings there. But I believe quite a few American companies are moving or opening up big businesses in Costa Rica because it's very stable and because there's a high level of education. So a lot of people speak English. Our bus driver was quite proud that his young grandson, probably about 6 or 7, was learning English. So there is quite a focus on that. And I think a lot of the companies are pharmaceuticals, places like that. In fact, several places we went, they were talking about there were some stingless bees there, like ours, a bit like ours, and they were looking at them in terms of their pharmaceutical benefits. These wasps, these warrior wasps, which had the very, very fierce sting, I think they're looking at the research on that. And those little yellow-eared bats, they talk about, I didn't understand or didn't read enough about it, but this pigment, the carotenoid pigment that causes their yellow noses and ears, they think, now someone else have to research on the internet, but there was some research going into that with the possibility of helping with glaucoma, I think it was. In other words, macular degeneration, I think. So I think because of the richness of the biodiversity, pharmaceuticals see the opportunity to go along and study them. Another one of the leafcutter ants. So when we're up at La Anita, where the cocoa plantation was, there was actually a separate set up there for American students to come down and study the leafcutter ants. And again, they were doing projects looking at the possibility of pharmaceutical spin-offs from understanding the biology of the ants. So yeah, there are quite a few businesses, but we only saw just the surface. Traveling with a group from Australia, you don't really get to know. One of our group, Lindsay from Western Australia, he was a wheat farmer, And he wanted to meet the people, and he loved trucks. So everywhere we stopped, whether on the highway where there were trucks, Lindsay was out there talking to the drivers and taking photos. So there was something for everybody. Thank you. Mhm.
I'll call on Robin to come and give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Well, that was just an amazing, interesting presentation. Thank you so much. It was obviously a fascinating country and a fascinating tour, and you were so well able to share that with us tonight with your fabulous photographs and your knowledge of all the plants and animals. It was really wonderful. I think I could sense the gasps from the audience with the beautiful colours of the birds and all those classic, the toucans and the hummingbirds and all the sloths and all those classic things, but also new animals that I've never heard of before. So it's just wonderful, the biodiversity that's there. So thank you so much. And we're so glad that you didn't get altitude sickness and you weren't stung by one of those nasty wasps. So you returned home safely to us. Now, we normally give our presenters a calendar.
So I bought 10 of them.
Yes. And you actually created it for all the work. And the other thing, of course, was excellent sound.
But I should point out that some of the people in our audience already have been to Costa Rica, particularly the Porrits and Phil Anderson quite recently, and their friend Alan Leishman over here. He and his wife 15 years ago drove around Costa Rica by themselves, not all helped by guides and things like that. So there are many other people here, and I'm sure some wonderful photos we might get to see. Certainly Phil shared some of them on Facebook.
Yes, to make the point, a very brief time in Costa Rica, they made the point that it's one of the very best places in the world to retire to. All your retirees, have up your superannuation, get to Costa Rica. They really look after you.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think there is the possibility that you're going to be pricing out the locals.
We did see some property for sale signs, and they're written in English.
And just in passing, Supper perhaps there are some brochures and maps and things over there if you want to look at it later on.
Thank you. So just please join us and say